This is a poem about one student's experience, in her words, living with more melanin than most people around her. It's titled "Everything But Us." They love our head wraps, the way the do-rags, elegant colors and prints curve and caress around our hair. They love our hair, the way our kinks and curls and coils frame our elegant faces with such pride. They love our faces, the way the chocolate melts into our eyes and drips down along our arms and stomachs. They love our food, the way the lingering taste of Creole and soul food makes their skin seize with satisfaction. They love our skin. Sun-kissed is never the right word, they say. Infatuated with how the melanin encases our muscles and tendons and smiles. They love the sound of us, the way our words and notes curl around the saxophones and double bass. So why is it that these people who claim to love everything about us seem to love everything about us but us? So Mike, Jess, and I are going to begin just sharing a little bit about why we have opted to bring poetry into our classrooms, ways in why we do that, and how we can do it in a variety of different ways. So I think what we'll do is, Jess, you can start first, and then I'll go, and then we'll have Mike, and then Mike is going to lead us into our first poetry exercise here. So go ahead, Jess, take it away.
Sure. So when I was in high school, I did not really like poetry. If you watched my Flipgrid intro video, you may have already heard a little bit about this. I loved English class, but I would always groan when we had to do poetry because it was just dead white male authors, and I was really worried about having the right answer, right? And so I really started to love poetry in undergrad. I started reading it for fun and kind of just picking up chapbooks and different zines and things that were being spread around East Lansing when I was going to MSU. And then when I did my master's program there, I had to do a teaching class about writing pedagogy where we had to write something new and like really delve into a genre that we hadn't participated in before. And so I chose poetry. And by the end of that summer class, I had to write a manuscript with 50 poems in it. And at first it was a little like begrudging and I didn't love it, but by the end it was my new favorite genre and I just wanted to teach it all the time. And kind of like Andy was saying before we officially started recording, I think poetry is a great way to introduce other small texts that don't necessarily have to be like district approved, right? It can be a great way to introduce students to new voices and controversial topics. And you can find a lot of the resources online, right? Or make a photocopy of a book. And students can find their own versions of that. So that's one way I've been sort of like disrupting my curriculum, is by including a lot of poetry and short texts.
Thanks. And for me, I guess, if I look back into it, I can say that I've always loved poetry. And I know that's going to sound weird, but even as like a little kid, I loved the way that language could play. I loved the sounds that language could make. I remember when I first started, I suppose, getting into music when I was probably 8 or 9 years old. This is aging me, the first cassette tape that my parents let me buy and that I wanted and I begged for, was Run DMC's Raising Hell, right? And my mom was like, that says hell on it. And I'm like, well, they're just talking about things, Mom. Can I get it? And she was kind enough. She bought it for me, right? And I listened to that all the time. And what did I like about that? I liked about the rawness. I liked the realness. I liked the beats of the music, but also the beats and the sounds of the words. That was just amazing to me. And I suppose that kind of just got tucked back into my memory. Like, I didn't think about that as poetry. It was fun to listen to, right? And if you were a kid growing up in the 80s, you probably listened to Rev Run and the rest of the crew, a little bit. And then once I got into high school, I took a creative writing class where the teacher said that our job was simply just to write. She would give us prompts to write about, but we would just write. And I remember saying, like, we can write like anything. And she said, you can write anything because your notebooks are not going to be shared with me. You can just write whatever you want to write. In fact, she said, put your music on. Sometimes music can be inspirational. So listen and go from there. And then I went through college, and I had a hard time thinking about what I could do to bring poetry into my classrooms, because I always figured it had to be like I had to do a poetry unit, or I had to find a way to pull some message out of the words, or talk specifically about the conventions that made poetry poetry. And that never really worked for my kids. And so it wasn't until I went to a conference and saw Tom Romano speak, and he always started every day with a poem. And I'll never forget watching him speak, because this guy's a pretty famous presenter. He's kind of like, a pretty big edu guru English guy, and he was nervous and he was tentative up at the podium, and he just simply said, I'd like to share a poem with you. And then he did. There was nothing else with it, and then he did. And that caused the room to pause as we just listened to everything that he had to say. And I just thought it was amazing. And I then thought, well, if Tom can do it, maybe I can do it. And I'm no Tom, but I might be able to try my best. And it was scary. But I started bringing poetry into my classroom every single day, and I'm not going back. So that's kind of where my love for it is. So cool. Thanks, Jess. Mike.
Okay, sorry about that. I love poetry. I recently unearthed a, I guess you'd call it a chapbook that I did in the 4th grade, in which I combined or collected some poems by Robert Frost and Carl Sandburg, and I wrote a couple of poems. One was called Love, the other was called Peace, and they had pictures drawn of them. So I guess I was taking on the big issues early on. But anyway, and then later in high school, I would start playing the guitar, and then Bob Dylan and John Prine became huge factors for me, because you didn't have to be Pavarotti, now I understood, just to start singing and playing songs. I've been teaching in college since 2014, journalism and then writing in 2017, and I learned this little exercise about lifting a line that we'll be doing shortly with Mary Oliver. And what that has done for me, and I do it at the start of all my classes early on, if not the first class, is it connects me to my students. It shows my enthusiasm. I write alongside them. It connects them with each other. It connects them with writing. It's very low stress, low stakes. It connects them with poetry, and it gets a good way to start the semester where we're already beginning to play with language and have some fun.
Awesome. So I'm going to try to do some snaps for Mike, and I'm going to try to do something. I don't know if I can do this. So I'm going to try to do a split screen where we can see Mary Oliver reading Wild Geese with also the text right next to it. But I don't know if Zoom's going to let me do that. We'll kind of find out. If it doesn't, we'll listen to Mary, and then later we'll show the words here in just a second. So let's give it a try. Oh, is it doing it?
We've just got Mary Oliver getting ready.
Can you see Wild Geese on the other side, or just Mary Oliver?
Just Mary Oliver.
Okay, so it's not quite doing it. That's all right. We'll listen to what Mary has to read in her poem, Wild Geese.
Wild geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things.
Okay, Mike, I'm going to bring up her words now. So if you want to walk us through what it is you want us to do with wild geese, that would be fantastic. I think it's safe to say, too, that you might want to have something to write with and something to write on, whether it's digital or I have usually my trusty notebook by my side someplace. We will be doing some writing today. We will be doing a bit of sharing today as well.
Yes, so when the poem gets called up here, what I ask my students to do, and I guess I'll ask you as well, is to, there it is to just choose a line. I learned last night that there's a term for this, lift a line. Just choose one of those lines that speaks to you for some reason, write it at the top of your page, and then just start writing a poem or a prose, whatever moves you. And then we'll share a little bit at the end. I don't know if there's any questions we need, but anyone could ask. Does that sound good? We can just start?
I think that sounds great, Mike. And one thing that I'm going to say too is that sometimes people don't like to have the camera on when they're writing. I don't mind. I'm in writing groups where that happens. So if you feel like turning your camera off during this or muting yourself, that's okay too. But we're going to take a good 5 minutes. Take a good 5 minutes, find a line, and then just take it wherever it happens to take you. Happy writing.
Two minutes left. about 30 seconds. If you could start wrapping it up with your last line or sentence.
Okay, cool.
Can we go? I want to see if I can get all the, if we can still get a gallery view so I can.
Yeah, let's do that. Oops, there's my timer. Stop my sharing.
Okay, there, thank you. So I like the whole I do, we do, you do approach. And so if you don't mind, I will just take a second and read a little bit of what I responded to this and then just go around. You do not have to be good, even though that's what I've been told I needed to be all my life. When I use this poem in class and students hear me read that first line, you do not have to be good, sometimes a student will let out a cheerful whoop and say, that's right. It's like that line gives us permission to find out what we might be like, to discover who we really are. Would Holly, you were the first one snapping. So can I ask you if you'd like to share just a line of it, or however much you'd like to share, or you can pass, I suppose.
Sure, I can share a little bit.
Thank you.
So I chose, meanwhile, the wild geese high in the clean blue air are heading home again. So I to you, landing firmly on familiar soil, the scent of roses, lavender, and fresh cut grass sweeps all-encompassing across the land. I linger, resting a while, before the cool wind floats down from the north, and I feel the urge to fly, dawning again, like wild geese high in the clean blue air.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brian?
The world offers itself to your imagination. So imagine all that can be, and on a timeline that can't even be seen. Go and ask the question, pick out the colors you want, eat that ice cream cone, tell her you love her.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Angela?
So the lines announcing your place in the family of things kind of launched me in a direction. So you were a sweet baby, easy to soothe. 40 years ago, you were so teeny and I felt so grown up. Looking back, I was 8, so young, wanting to be so old.
Thank you. Anna?
So I took the line, whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination. And I said, imagination, what I said, let's hold on. What is imagination in a world of prescribed behaviors, beliefs, and systems we all subscribe to? Imagination is at the inspiration of independent yet incremental steps within the circle. That space where we decide what is enough and what is too much. Whoever you are breath, you are imagination, you are breezes and winds and squalls that put us in place.
Thank you. Diane, would you like to share?
Is Diane still here?
She is. I can see her. I think she's
If
unmuting.
it's D. Meister, it's Debbie. Is that
Oh,
who you're
I'm
after?
sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. Someone said Diane and Debbie.
Yep.
My apologies.
No
My bad.
problem. Okay, let's see. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert. Sacrifice. It's what you do for people you really care about. You subjugate self. You say, this, whatever, won't matter in 5 years. You say, these students are important. You say, I don't feel well, but that's not important. You say, I love to teach, to pour into them until there's nothing left of you. You're tired, burned out. But Mary Oliver says you don't have to be tired, burned out, poured out till you're empty. Announce yourself in the family of things.
Thank you. Alana?
I joined late, so I don't know that I did it right, but I just copy changed the first of the poem, so I hope this
Sure.
is okay. I said, you do not have to be loud. You do not have to stand on a piano for an encore of a dance routine singing. So.
Okay, thank you.
Very nice, thank you.
Jess?
Sure. I did the Meanwhile the World Goes On. And I said, somewhere a toddler stumbles on a beach, grasping at fistfuls of hot sand.
Thanks. Last but not least, Andy?
Cool. So I kind of have a nearly finished piece. Of course, it's very rough, but I'm going to read it. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, know that you are not alone. The world beats on with its noise and its brashness. It moves everyone from time to time down unknown roads. The roads you may have already envisioned for yourself. It is the unknown that we fear, and we raise our voices against it because we are fragile, because we are unsure, because we know better. So I say to you, lift your voices and stand up for the vision that you hold in your hearts. We hear you. We see you. You are not alone.
Thank you.
Cool. So a couple things with this particular process. There were some protocols kind of in place, right? So we didn't do a whole, Mike shared a specific idea. He walked us through a poem. In this case, it was lifting out of a line. And then we gave some space and time to do this. Now, when I do this with my students and I teach juniors and seniors, and I'm not sure how Mike feels or how Jess feels, but I know my seniors, they walk in, they're like looking around like, seriously, we're gonna like do poetry? And I say, you know, it's like you already like poetry, you just don't realize you do. You know, because if you listen to music, you like poetry. You have to. There's even if that music has no words, you like poetry. So you already do. So I think what you don't like is what I tell students is the way that poetry has been done to you. That's what you don't like, right? And so what I'm going to try to do is, and I'm going to try to not do that. So we're just going to listen to the words and honor the words. We're not necessarily going to talk about what we like or we don't like. I'm not going to tell you there's some advice or some message that you need to hear. We are just going to begin every day just to listen. That is like your job, is just to listen. Okay, which by the way is a Common Core standard, right? Like speaking and listening. So we can hit right from the beginning. And I always find it's so valuable because when we start, just like when we started this here today, we are in, man. We are centered. We are good to go. And if I have kids who sometimes are being goofy, I'll just stop. I'll say, I can tell you've never been to a poetry reading before. But you have been to the movies, and you have been to places where you know what the etiquette is, and the directions are quite clear. All you need to do is listen. And that usually kind of sets in the hearts of kids pretty quick. Sometimes, and this is strange, if it doesn't work, I'll ask a kid to leave and they can come back when they're ready to listen to the beautiful words that are filling in our classroom space. And you know what? They don't really want to leave. A lot of it is because kids are uncomfortable with the idea of what poetry, how they have been taught poetry. You know, so we don't do a whole lot with it. We do this. And I think too, what's nice is Mike did a great job of kind of modeling it is, you know, we give the opportunity to share. Okay. We did snaps every time for people because in this space, we're sort of used to doing that. I don't usually do that in my classes. What I'll say is, when I ask if someone will say a word, phrase, or sentence, and I'll try to nudge. I'll do the pass, but pretty soon, you know kids well enough, you get one pass, and then the next one passes, and the next one passes, and pretty soon you don't have any sharing of words, okay? So I'll let that happen maybe a little bit in the beginning, and then as we go on, I'll do gentle nudges. Well, a word, phrase, or sentence. I mean, you can do a word. Try not to choose and, I, or but, or the, right? Or you can choose a word, right? But then over time, these gentle nudges move into larger sharings, and pretty soon you have kids who want to share whole pieces, which is crazy. Because if you were to ask these kids in the beginning if they would ever do that, they would flat out say, "There's no way. Nope, I wouldn't do it." And when a student finishes, we just say thank you for sharing. I don't want to say how awesome that is, how awful that is. I don't want all that. Just thank you for sharing. And then we do snaps, but we do snaps for everybody at the end, because there's a thing about poetry too. There's a thing about writing. And that thing is, it sometimes feels as though you're not good enough for some people. Like either you have it or you don't have it. And I don't believe that, right? I don't believe that. I think when it comes to writing, just like when it comes to anything, the more you do something, the more you sort of get familiar with it, and the more that you learn to explore and you learn to play. And so it's not about a competition, it's just about a celebration and a collaboration and lifting those types of ideas up. I think, so I just wanted to kind of couch that so you can see sort of what Mike and Jess and I are doing. I'm going to turn the mic over to Jessica here right now. She's going to share a document. I'll put the document back in the chat. This is a lot of different things that she does with poetry in her classroom. So Jess, when you're ready.
Sure, and do you also want to share that maybe on your screen for us?
Yep, I'll be happy to do that. Let me pull it up real quick.
Yeah, awesome. So I think I approach poetry very similarly to Mike and Andy. I don't do a poem every single day, but almost every day in class, we start with some sort of mentor text writing in our notebooks. So usually it ends up being poetry just because poetry lends itself well, right? And being a short text. So I just wanted to compile some things that pretty much anybody could incorporate into their class, whether you're teaching a poetry class, which I do, or you're just trying to incorporate some sort of poetry lesson, whether it's remote or in person. So the first section, and I'm happy to talk about more of any of these if you guys have questions as they pop up. I just listed off 4 different mentor texts that I've often used to launch like the first day of class. And they're not all poems, but they lend themselves well to writing poetry. So I don't know, for example, if you're familiar with My Honest Poem by Rudy Francisco, but basically he starts off by listing his birthday and saying like, I think that makes me a Leo. I'm 5'7". This is how much I weigh. I'm a sucker for girl with clean sneakers. So it's sort of all these sort of disparate facts about him. And it's a really great way to start off the school year or a class or a unit, because all students are like, well, I can write a poem, right? That includes my birthday and something that I find attractive in another person and something I'm not good at. It's basically all these different confessions. And all the other mentors here are kind of similar. Some of you might be familiar with the Rambling Autobiography. The next one, I'm Native, but I'm Not, is actually a BuzzFeed video, and it has Indigenous people talking about different things that they've been stereotyped as. So they say like, I'm Native, but I don't wear war paint, right? I'm Native, but whatever. And so that can be a really great way to frame a class, getting students thinking about like, okay, I'm a swimmer, but you know, I don't shave my legs, or whatever stereotype has been applied to them. And then I've been trying to get away from the Where I'm From poem a little bit, just because it is taught so often. And I have juniors and seniors, and a lot of times that is a middle school thing, although I think you could write that poem a million times, right? It could turn out differently every single time. So I've kind of shifted to using Raised by Women by Kelly Norman Ellis, and it kind of goes through like who in your community has raised you and like what have they taught you. So those are some that I like to launch a class, and usually how I frame that is like just what we did. I say either like lift a line and keep writing, or write your own version quickly of this poem in the time we have. And another powerful thing that I've done both online and in person is then have students add their one line from what they wrote that they would have shared out to a collaborative document. So like I'll have a big sticky note piece of paper, right? Chart paper, and everybody anonymously adds one line from their honest poem, and then we hang it up. And it's our 3rd hour honest poem or whatever. And Padlet can be a really great way to do that too, although it won't necessarily be anonymous, right? You could just use a Google Doc. to share with remote learning. So that's kind of how I usually start a unit out. The next section is, I think the best way to get kids interested in poetry is to share a great mentor text, or to do what Mike and Andy did at the beginning of this, to share a really great poem. But I still have some students, right, who are like, but what I'm writing isn't poetry, right? I'm writing in paragraphs, or like, this isn't fun to me, like I'm really stressed out by it. So these are just a list of some of the things that I do to get students thinking about playing with language. So I don't know if you guys want me to talk about any of these specifically. You're more than welcome to click on the links, but all of these involve sort of different versions of found poetry, right? Students just finding interesting words or lines that they like and rearranging them based on the sound, and saying like, anybody can be a poet, right? And a huge part of poetry is drawing from other people's work and really evaluating, like, is there such a thing as creativity, right? Or an original idea. We're always just sort of like rearranging things. So I think that's pretty cool. And then the next section, if we just want to kind of chat about that, I had my students in my poetry specific class do several projects that have to do with poetry. And some of them are ones that I've done in class as well. So I think they work really well for virtual or traditional learning settings. Unfortunately, I wanted to link to the actual assignments I give my students and then an example, but I can't log into my district Google Drive right now. So all of these links will take you to maybe something that inspired me assigning that assignment, or an explanation from like an external website about how to do it. But these are all things that I would highly recommend if you either teach a poetry class or you want to do a quote unquote unit that's a little bit longer and more focused that you could add. So, and then I just listed off some of my favorite web resources and some of the many books that I use when I'm lesson planning, and tried to be really cognizant that a lot of us are thinking about remote learning settings, especially. So a lot of the links to the web resources are specifically people writing about on blogs, how they use poetry during remote learning too. So that's kind of a quick overview of my resource. So if anyone wants to jump in with questions or suggestions, or wants me to explain something in more depth, just let me know.
I think what we're going to do is I want to show just a quick video that a student of mine did while in quarantine, because poetry isn't just for poetry's sake. The language that we use in poetry and the vulnerability that poetry creates and the empathy that poetry creates, it moves itself into other genres. And so you're going to see a This I Believe digital story that a student of mine have done. And I just want to say, with this particular student, she's already given me permission to share this, so that's okay. It's also unlisted, so if you go to try to find it, you're not going to be able to find it. You can talk to me. But also, she was a student with the beginning of class, in the beginning of the year, would come in every day late with some excuse, and soon started coming in on time. In her words, in the beginning, well, I don't know, I just wanted to be here on time, but soon it turned into, I kind of like to hear the words that I'm missing, which soon turned into, I really don't think I like poetry that much, which soon turned into beautiful pieces that she started to create on her own, okay? So I'm gonna share this with you, and then we'll have time left over. When the time is done, then we'll kind of open it up for conversation, okay? So let me find that really quick, and I'll share that out. I'll let Monica speak for herself. This is a This I Believe digital story that she has titled, You Shouldn't Have to Change Your Identity to Fit In.
What if everyone in the world looked alike? Would we look gray and ashen? Or would we look colorful and bright? Would I love my skin even then? The truth is, it doesn't matter. I believe that no one should have to change their identity to fit in. I believe that dark skin is beautiful. I believe that light skin is beautiful. I believe that all skin is beautiful. But it's not something that came to me easy as a child. In middle school, girls my age would start to experiment into makeup. While they painted their eyes with beautiful blues and radiant reds, I was still trying to find my own foundation color. When I was 12 years old, I asked my mother if we could go down the street to the store. She asked me why, and I told her I don't buy some lipstick. She turned to me and said, Miniba, ope fine, noko noko behe, which translates to, why? You're okay. Nothing's wrong with you. I thought she had to be kidding. I mean, how could I be pretty with my dark skin, my hyperpigmented eyes and my round cheeks? I thought my face was way too dark and misshapen to be as beautiful as she said I was. My days in school were spent sitting in the back of the classroom with a hood on, hopeful I wouldn't be called upon and have a class face me as they dissect my being. While my friends laid on the beach to achieve their summer tan, I dressed in pants and long-sleeve shirts that would cover me head to toe to ensure the sun couldn't kiss me. This took a toll on my confidence growing up, as a look in the mirror would remind me that I didn't look the same as my peers. I felt captive in my own skin, a prisoner to Eurocentric beauty standards in tabloids and magazines. But my junior year, I had an opportunity to go to my motherland, where my parents grew up, under the beating sun close to the equator. I saw so many women who looked just like me. High cheekbones, eyes brown as roasted hazelnuts. I quickly began to realize it didn't matter how light or dark my skin was. It didn't change who I was as an individual. I didn't need to compare myself to my friends or her society looks to be happy with myself. My past is present for billions in the world. It's a narrative of many Black women in America who are put down for the stereotypes of a perfect woman. So many of us are shamed into what we naturally look like because of society standards set by ourselves. Time and reinsurance has taught me that I am a beautiful, courageous woman, and it doesn't matter what I look like. I smile again and I take another picture because I believe that I'm okay with my own skin.
So, I think you can hear in that narrative how poetry has influenced her. So, with the few minutes we have left, about 3-4 minutes, I'd like to open it up. I'm going to mute myself and just hear what some people might have to say.
I caught right away that just the poetic sound. I forgot that I was reading this, I believe. It really, or hearing one, it sounded so poetic versus most narratives that I read this year.
Just out of curiosity, Andy, what platform did you use to create the video?
I have had students use WeVideo. I think that Monica used iMovie on her Mac. I don't get hung up on what platform students choose to use. I give options, you know, but I usually use WeVideo. I think that was iMovie though.
I think in this assignment, we can see how safe the students feel being this vulnerable in a class and sharing something so deeply personal, even if it is like, you know, with a teacher as opposed to sharing in front of the whole class. I think it speaks volumes to the class environment and, you know, using, you know, poetry purposefully every day, that students are able and willing to share something like this.
I'm glad that you said that, Holly, because one of the things that all students knew going into this, which actually becomes a bit of a nerve-wracking thing for kids, but I think it's good, is we finished. They don't just share videos with me. We finished with a celebration. They share their videos with me. I put it in a YouTube playlist, and we bring in popcorn and food and all sorts of stuff. Today we couldn't do that, but I asked them to do that. We go to the big screen in my school where we have our meetings, like it's like a movie theater, and I just press play. And so I score these things, which are super easy to score, by the way. And we just watch. And everyone, when their video comes up, kind of does this. But whenever someone else's video comes up, they kind of go, like, you know, it's pretty awesome. You know, Angela, you had something you wanted to say too, but I think you might have been muted.
I did. Sorry. I was wondering what kinds of publishing opportunities you offer. That is such a beautiful poem that would be so relatable in so many different directions. And I try to offer my kids poetry possibilities, and I know that it elevates them just suggesting that they should take it to another level. Do you have any ideas of where they could go?
Yeah, I have a couple places. So some I'm going to be sharing on Monday, but just like real quick. So I try to keep my writing life open. I try to keep what I'm doing so that they can see that I'm not just teaching writing, I'm also practicing. I am a practicing writer. I am a practicing reader. I mean, does that kind of make sense? So in Monica's case, when she shared that, my first go-to was I have these digital permission forms that I share out. So when students have really awesome things like this, I don't want it to be hidden away in some digital space. I asked Monica if she minded if I put it on Facebook and if I put it on Twitter, that it would be unlisted, but people will be able to find it within those spaces. And on Twitter, I asked if she had a Twitter handle, because that way she could get some love that she would receive back. So it's not just teachers saying how good it is, because like my daughters will say, when you tell me you love me, Dad, and I'm pretty, well, you're my dad, you have to say that. And I think our students feel the same way about us. Like, you're my teacher, like you have to tell me I did a good job, you know? So hearing it from other people is one way I do it. I've created a Live Right EduBlog site where it's not everyone's work, but some amazing pieces that come in, we share those out. So there's a number of different avenues. And for this particular video, I don't have a contract yet, but I'm working on a second book, and I've already asked Monica. I'd be honored if we could have that video and that process, because it's looking at rural voices and helping students elevate and raise rural voices. And that would be an excellent example of how you might be able to do that. So she got super excited about that, right? Because you mean I can actually really, like, for real get published, Mr. Schoenborn? I said, yeah, and I hope you keep writing, because girl, you got it. You know?
Literally.
Yeah.
Cool.
She didn't always feel that way though, you know? And I think that's important to note too, right? Because she was in a class with me, an AP Lit class, okay? But it's a year-long class, okay? So it took a good 12, 24 weeks of poetry every single day, and not beating it to death, and just enjoying hearing. And pretty soon, even like we're doing here, like the silly things of just snapping fingers, and like somebody would say something, and just like in discussion, and some kid in the back would just be like, you know, so it doesn't even have to be poetry related, but it's I just love it as a habit and a routine that we can acknowledge each other for. And kids think it's weird at first. And I tell them, you're going to think this is weird, but you will soon find that it's weird not to do it. Cool. I think that our time is just about up here. So on behalf of Mike and Jess and everyone else here, thank you so much for joining us here today, and for writing and sharing and learning with us. And I'm going to end our session here. And I think we're hopping back to the main room, Troy's room, right? So thank you so much, folks. I'll see you in the other room. Bye-bye.